Hi, I'm Paul Kelley. Welcome back to NCGR's Foundations of Astrology video lecture series. The topic of today's lecture is the planets, because you are more than just your sun sign. Before I begin, I'd like to say a little bit about the organization I belong to. So let me bring up my screen share and get started on that. This, of course, is the National Council for Geocosmic Research, or NCGR. Now, if you go to ncgr.org, you'll see another organization's website. So don't do that. Instead, go to geocosmic.org, geo for the Earth and cosmic for the order of the universe. So it's a good website name or website address, because astrology is all about the connection between the Earth and the order of the universe. But it's a little harder to remember. So once again, that's geocosmic.org. And the YouTube channel, which you're viewing this on, is NCGR, the Geocosmic. On NCGR's website, you'll see things like the benefits of membership, which include newsletters and publications, free access to webinars, which are organized by Jackie Slevin, our education director. And you'll also get discounts on conferences, which are organized every few years, and the monthly meetings of local chapters. And these are both really great ways to get to know people and begin creating your own astrological community. They certainly were for me. This is really how I got started. These meetings have been online since the pandemic began, so you can attend several meetings a month if you want to. Hopefully this option will continue in the future. So you don't need to be a member to attend these meetings or the conferences, but it will cost you less. Finally, I want to mention Mira Epstein's classes, which are also online. Now, Mira is a fantastic teacher. She really cares about her students' learning progress. So if you're enjoying these lectures and you want to pursue a deeper education, either now or several years down the road, it took me quite a while to get into the classes and actually start the certification process to be a certified professional astrologer. But whenever you decide to do it, if you decide to do it, you can find out more about them on the NCGR website, which again is geocosmic.org. These classes will thoroughly prepare you for each of 4 levels of professional certification exams, and these are serious exams. But you can just take the classes if you don't want to take the exams for the certification. Either way, you'll get a comprehensive college-level education in astrology. Very well-rounded, a lot of depth to it. You will know your stuff when you're done these classes. The title of my lecture is Lights, Planets, Action. Lights refers to the sun and the moon, also called the luminaries, because they're the 2 brightest objects in the sky. Of course, the word planets refers to the other major objects in the sky, but we'll also throw the sun and the moon into that category, just as a shorthand way of referring to all the main characters that show up on a chart. Astrologers actually do know the difference between a sun, a moon, and a planet. Action refers to the fact that the planets are the actors in the chart. They're the agents of the chart. They do things. They're the characters in the story of our lives. They express their actions. They play out their roles with the energy of the zodiac sign they're in. So that's the connection between the planet and the sign. The planets express their actions or play out their role using the energy of the sign that their zodiac, of the sign that they're in. So if you think about it, 2 sun signs are different in nature, sun in Gemini versus sun in Capricorn, for instance. The sun has the same basic role to play in the chart, and we'll talk about that later. But the energy of the sign changes how the sun expresses itself in that role. Planets are represented by symbols on a chart, and we'll see each of those symbols as we go through each planet, each sun, the sun, the moon, each planet individually. Okay, so here we have the solar system. This is the cast of characters, if you will, and our understanding of it is really changing, especially since the first trans-Neptunian object, that is, the small objects which were found out past the orbit of Neptune, since that was discovered in 1992, and especially since the largest of these, Eris, was discovered in 2005. If you'll recall, Eris, the goddess of discord and strife, was the one that started a whole debate about what is a planet, which ended up with Pluto getting quote unquote demoted to dwarf planet status. And dwarf planet then was a new category that would include Pluto, Eris, the asteroid Ceres, and several other of these objects out there with Pluto and Eris at the edge of the solar system. So this kind of refreshing of our picture of the solar system is nothing new. For all of human history up until 1781, Saturn was the last known planet. And then that changed when Uranus was discovered. In 1840, Neptune was discovered. In the 1840s, Neptune was discovered. And in 1930, Pluto was discovered. And so each time that we gained a different picture, broadened our view of the solar system, astrologers would begin exploring these new objects and incorporating meanings, finding meanings for them and incorporating those into their interpretations. So the classical planets are still the most important. Those are the ones from the sun out to Saturn. We still think of them in a more distinguished way because they have been around throughout human history. But we continue to integrate these new discoveries into interpretations. So today we're going to stick to the tradition of the last century or so by talking about Pluto as if it were a planet and if it were the last one. But as I said, astrologers are exploring astrological meanings for the new discoveries, things like Eris and Chiron, which was discovered in 1977. It's an object between Saturn and Uranus. And they are doing that just as they did with previous discoveries. So when astrologers say you are more than your sun sign, they really mean it. You can find the location of any object in the solar system, find the zodiacal degree, and put it in your chart. You can look it up in a thing called the ephemeris, which you'll see at the end of the lecture. You can try to find a meaning for it. There's the sun, the moon, planets, asteroids, the things called centaurs like Chiron. There's TNOs, the trans-Neptunian objects. But the sun, the moon, and the planets are still the main characters. Now, Earth is not in the chart because a chart is a diagram representing the sky, both above and below the horizon. A chart is a diagram representing the sky, both above and below the horizon, at a specific time and place. Okay, since we're looking at the sky while we're standing on the Earth is not in the sky, so the Earth is not in the chart. Here's a really cool video that will take you through the solar system, and it shows how the planets group themselves naturally. Down there on the bottom right is Neptune. And then Uranus is the smaller one that follows Neptune off the screen. Just to the right there. Now you see Jupiter and Saturn. And now you see the asteroid belt and the planets Mars, Earth, Venus, Mercury, and then the sun in the center. Let me run that through again. Pluto's not in here either because, this was made since Pluto was quote unquote demoted, or just because it's a very small object and it would not be visible at the scale that this video was made. So you see the planets. Here's Jupiter and Saturn. There's the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, and there's Mars, there's the Earth, there's Mercury and Venus, and the sun in the center. So grouping the planets is really important. It makes it a little bit easier to remember, but it also carries some meaning with it. So we call the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars personal planets because they represent the parts of our personality that make us unique. They represent our everyday selves. The moon changes signs about every 2.5 days. The Sun, Mercury, Venus change signs about once a month. And Mars takes about 2 months to go through a sign. Two people then who were born less than a week apart will have noticeable differences in the way these planets are arranged in their chart in the sky. And therefore, they will express themselves differently in their personalities. Okay, so just a few weeks, just a few days even difference between births will create a significantly different personality when it comes to these planets, from the Sun, the Moon, out to Mars. So we call them the personal planets because their expression in each individual is pretty unique. Now, Jupiter and Saturn are the social planets. They take about, well, Jupiter takes 1 year and Saturn takes 2.5 years to go through a sign. So they represent things like a class or a cohort rather than an individual. So everyone does have Jupiter and Saturn in their charts because it was in the sky somewhere above or below the horizon when they were born. So they do have their own personal relationship to them. They have part of their personality that is infused with their energy, with the kinds of things that they represent. But they'll share that part of their personality, that trait, with others who were born that year or within a year or two of that. On a larger scale than the individual, Jupiter and Saturn represent how society organizes and regulates itself, especially the economy. So we call them the social planets. Finally, there are the energies that are bigger than any individual, and these are symbolized by the transpersonal planets. So Uranus is the first of these, takes about 7.5 years to go through a sign. Neptune and Pluto can take 10 to 15 years. So these represent the zeitgeist, if you will, or the energy of a generation. So you've heard of Generation X and the baby boomers, Generation Z, the millennials, the greatest generation, the silent generation. These are all large groups of people spanning several years or even a decade of time. And the outer planets are the transpersonal planets. The transpersonal planets are the ones that move at a rate that reflects the length of time that these generations really relate to. So all of the people born within that time span will have these planets in a particular grouping in certain relationship to each other in certain signs, and they'll stay that way for a long time. So a whole bunch of people will be born with these planets in the same sign. And so again, they represent kind of a generation, and it's something much larger than any kind of individual personality or even a class or a cohort, something where people are born within a year or two of each other. These are much bigger energies. So again, an individual does have these energies, these planets in their charts because they were in the sky when they were born. And they have ways that their personal planets tap into the energies of these larger planets, depending on how they're arranged in the chart. But problems can arise when people begin identifying or trying to take the energy, these big energies of the outer planets, of the transpersonal planets, and make them their own, or think that they are them, right? Begin identifying with them is the way we say it. It's part of a growth process of an individual to recognize the subtle boundary between personal and transpersonal energies. So in a way, these are bigger energies that, again, we're tapping into, or we're serving or helping to shape or being used by in our lives. And they are something bigger than us. So it's good to recognize the boundary between our own personal everyday selves and these larger energies that represent the generation. A little bit about a word I kept tripping up on. You'll see a lot of astrologers call the transpersonal planets outer planets. And then they'll call the personal planets the inner planets. So that's something pretty common. And Jupiter and Saturn, they might throw into one or another category or keep them in between. So you'll hear inner and outer planets. When astronomers talk about inner and outer planets, they're talking about something else. They're talking about planets within Earth's orbit or on the other side, beyond Earth's orbit. And so that would only include Mercury and Venus as an inner planet, whereas astrologers often include everything out to Mars as an inner planet. So it's a little confusing. In order to avoid that confusion, the best way to talk about these planets are personal planets, social planets, and transpersonal planets. And that, again, also reminds you of the meaning that they carry. So let's talk about each of these individually. First, let's start with the sun. There's the symbol for the sun, the circle with the dot in the center of it, symbolizing the sun at the center of the solar system. It's the source of all the energy in the solar system. It powers everything. It holds the solar system together with its mass, attracting the other planets. It holds them in place. It's the solar system. It belongs to the sun. So it's at the center of everything. It shines the brightest. It provides light. And those are just facts. Those are just the facts of the sun itself. It's astronomy. So let's take those facts and make them metaphorical. In astrology, the sun represents things like our vitality and our creativity, how we shine, in other words. It's the symbol for who we are. And that's why people say I am a Libra or a Gemini rather than I was born with the sun in Libra or the sun in Gemini. Psychologically, it represents the ego, which is the organizer of our personality. So the sun organizes the solar system, the planets, into their orbits around it. The sun in astrology is the ego, which organizes the various parts of our personality and tries to get them working together. With the sun, we do things consciously in the light of day, as opposed to doing things out of habit or unconsciously. And that brings us to the moon, because the moon represents our habits. In astronomy, the moon is the second brightest object in the sky. You can see the symbol for it there on the right. It's the crescent, and I've seen it facing either way. Like the planets, the moon reflects the light of the sun rather than making its own. Unlike the daily march of the sun across the sky, the moon changes in size and location from night to night. It grows from a crescent in the western sky to a full moon rising at sunset and then waning until it is lost once again in the sun's rays at the next new moon. The moon in astrology symbolizes the energy of our emotions and our emotional needs. It tells you how a person expresses what they feel and how they react to things. It reveals what we do to feel comforted and safe. As such, it represents our routines and habits, things that we are so used to doing, or things that we learned so early on in our lives that we don't have to think about them. The moon also represents our emotional minds, things like a gut feeling, intuition, and memories and nostalgia. The moon describes our mothers or other nurturing figures and how we experience them. So if you ask two siblings about their mothers, they might give you two very different answers. And those answers you'll see will reflect the sign that their moon is in their individual charts. You can try it out. The moon symbolizes cycles of all kinds, menstrual cycles, tidal cycles, all kinds of cyclical rhythms. It also symbolizes the public, because the public acts out of habit and does what makes it feel comfortable and secure. So again, the moon is our emotional energy. It's our unconscious. It's our habits, routines, the things we do regularly. The sun, on the other hand, represents the light of day. It's our consciousness, our conscious habits, our egos. So here is where we take the first step in creating an interpretation, which is just an astrological sentence, if you will. We're combining the action of a planet with the energy of the sign. So it's kind of like combining a verb and modifying it with an adverb. The sun creates. It's our authentic self. Okay, so what's the sun like in Capricorn? Well, in Capricorn, which is a kind of serious, hardworking energy, it expresses its creative self by taking on responsibility for planning projects and achieving goals. The sun in Leo, on the other hand, expresses itself very naturally by being a playful, creative person that joyfully sends out warmth and love to their audience. Of course, if they're a wounded lion, they can be a real egotistical jerk. You probably met one of those Leo types. But with Leo, I've learned the proper thing to do is to let them perform. You're their audience, enjoy it, and applaud at the end, right? That's proper for Leo energy. If a Capricorn did that, it would not work because that's not the nature of Capricorn's energy. The moon nurtures, protects, it represents the energy of our emotions and our needs. The moon in Capricorn finds comfort in having goals. It can be stoic or have a witty, dry sense of humor. It provides nurturing by creating structure and limits. And a person with a moon in Capricorn may have taken on adult responsibilities even as a child. So they may have worked or cared for a younger sibling or a parent. The moon in Leo, on the other hand, expresses its emotions dramatically, perhaps performing them for an audience. It seeks attention when it's upset, and it nurtures by providing a play space for others and celebrating their creativity. That's wonderful, Johnny. I love that. Do it again. Here. Do more. Create. I love it. Okay, so the moon in Capricorn, moon in Leo. Same thing, two different ways of expressing it. Same lyrics, different melody. Here are some examples. Capricorn sun, Denzel Washington, award-winning actor. He is also an Aquarius moon. He was born in 1954 in Mount Vernon, New York, which is right by New York City. Here's a quote from a motivational speech he gave. Between goals and achievement are discipline and consistency. You cannot get more Capricorn than that, right? That is just the essence of Capricorn right there in that one quote. Goals, achievement. It's all about Capricorn and sticking with it to the end. Capricorn moon, Abraham Lincoln. Now, Abraham Lincoln was the inverse of Denzel Washington. He's an Aquarius sun with a Capricorn moon. So he was the US president during the Civil War, born in Hodgenville, Kentucky in 1809. Capricorn themes that came up in his life. Remember, the moon represents our emotional energy. So he experienced a lot of emotional hardship from the early deaths of his mother, a sibling, and children. He suffered from depression. He also had a witty sense of humor and a fatherly nature. So these are all very Capricorn kinds of ways of expressing one's emotions. Other good examples of a Capricorn moon include David Letterman and Johnny Depp. So David Letterman, well-known talk show host, late night show host, known for being a very hard worker and having very high demands of the people who worked for him. Had to have it exactly a certain way because the show had to succeed, meet his standards. Johnny Depp, actor, producer, director, also known for succeeding in the film industry, but also often being moody and suffering from depression. Now, here's a Leo moon with a Capricorn sun, and I love this picture because it depicts the two combined together so beautifully. David Bowie, superstar, musician, and performer, born in 1947 in England. Here you go with the formality of the Capricorn in the suit, but it's not a gray pinstripe suit. And the background is not a plain gray wall or a white wall. It's this dramatic florally expression. He's got the silk tie, fancy shirt underneath the suit jacket. So there's this flamboyance that grabs your attention with David Bowie, but at the same time, there's this very formal exterior and a lot of success too, which are all Capricorn traits. So he was not just a wonderful performer, um, one who broke many barriers in the music industry, did a lot of new attention grabbing things, but was solidly successful in business. Other example, the first couple, former president and first lady, Michelle Obama was the Capricorn sun and Barack Obama had the Leo sun. Okay, before I move on to the planets, I want to mention the lunar phase or the moon phase, because the phase of the moon gives you as much information about the person as the sun and the moon do individually. So definitely learn your lunar phase and look for some interpretations of it. I won't go through them here just to save time, but let's just do the basics. The lunar phase is simply the relationship between the sun and the moon. So in the diagram up top here, picture the sun shining down from way up above the top of your screen. It casts its light on different amounts of the moon's surface as the moon goes around the Earth. From new moon to new moon, it takes about 28 and a half days. There are 8 phases that 28 and a half days is divided into. So to find your lunar phase, you can go to a site like moonpage.com and you type in your date of birth. It's important to know the time as well, because the moon will change from sign to sign during the course of a day. But that's pretty easy to figure out because the moon is a strong part of your personality, and you can usually distinguish between whether you're one moon sign or the next. Because if you recall from the second lecture I gave, the ecology of the zodiac, signs that are next to each other have nothing in common. The energies are completely different. So you should be able to distinguish and tell what moon sign you are. Okay, astrologers use different words for 2 of the phases, different words from astronomers. The waning gibbous phase we call disseminating phase, and the waning crescent phase we call balsamic. There are some good sources for finding out the character, the traits associated with each moon phase. Cafe Astrology, which is a very popular website, but it has good quality information, in my opinion. You can go to Cafe Astrology natal lunar phases, and that will have a description for each lunar phase once you find yours, which one yours is. And also the moon watching series on astro.com, which is Astrodeans, which is a really good website. I still use it for my charts. Astro.com astrology in DG moon watching EHTM. You can take a screenshot and copy the links there. Also, if you like the tangible books, Donna Cunningham's Moon Science book is an oldie but goodie. I mean, it must be getting close to 50 years old by now, but it has really good descriptions of the lunar phases. And again, the lunar phase is as strong, it shows up as strongly in a personality as the moon or sun sign do individually. So definitely check it out. Mercury, Venus, and Mars, the rest of the personal planets. Here's the symbol for Mercury, the winged messenger. So there you see the helmet with the wings on it so that it can fly from place to place, delivering information, connecting people, connecting things. Mercury symbolizes our mental energy. It's the energy of our rational minds and our intellect. And its placement in a sign tells you about things like our everyday minds and their thoughts, our nervous systems and our dexterity, how our minds, in other words, are wired into our bodies, and how we can use that energy to interact with our immediate environment. Similarly, machines and mechanical things can be ruled by Mercury or related to Mercury. Communications, writing, and documents are all really big things. You know, when Mercury goes retrograde, don't sign any contracts. It just means, we'll talk about retrograde in another lecture, but it just means things slow down. You have to be more careful. The neighborhood, local travel, siblings, these are all things that in one way or another are close to us. We're connected to them and they're nearby. So they can also be represented by Mercury. So if you think about it, what's it like being in different signs? Are we chatty and casual like Gemini, or are we reserved and serious like Capricorn? Are our minds practical like an earth sign, or poetic like a water sign? Are they inspired and immediate like a fire sign, or logical like an air sign? Venus and Mars. Oh, first an example, Sarah Silverman, well-known comedian and also an advocate. She is known for saying and talking about anything, no filters whatsoever. And that's part of the shock value, it's part of the comedic character that she's created, which brings up issues that play with ideas about social taboos and controversial subjects. So again, Sagittarian Mercury, Sagittarius, that fire sign, it just has to express itself. That's the nature of fire energy. And with a Mercury there, it will express itself through in how the person communicates. So anything will come out that's in her mind, no worries, no filters. Now, she also has a Capricorn moon, and she is known to have had frequent bouts of depression, but also achieved quite a bit. So driven emotionally to succeed, and experiencing depression when that was difficult. So Sarah Silverman, good example of Sagittarian Mercury and also a Capricorn moon. Okay, now Venus and Mars. Venus and Mars are both about desire. They are about what you want. Now, the moon can also be about what you want because it's your emotions. We have emotional needs, things we want to feel comforted or secure, things we do to feel okay. Like I'm a Virgo moon, so, you know, if I want to take care of myself, I'll go over to a shelf and start putting things in order on the shelf or straightening things, because that's comforting, soothing for me. That wouldn't be soothing for a Leo moon. They'd have to go act something out, right? Go to a drama or work in the theater or something. But Venus and Mars are that different kind of desire about this is what I want in life, or this is what I want to have around me. And they differ in how they go about getting it. So Venus attracts things while Mars acts to get them. Venus creates relationships while Mars individuates. Venus learns about herself through the mirror of a relationship, and Mars through the challenges he faces. Venus and Mars are both tasked with finding out what it is that they really want, what they desire, and learning about desire through their interactions. So, what is of value is a question for Venus. And for Mars, it's what's worth fighting for, what's worth getting out there and getting motivated to do. Now, here's an important note. Everyone was born with Venus and Mars somewhere in their chart because they are always up there in the sky. All right, but I'll check. Still there? Yep, still there. Okay, they haven't fallen out of the sky yet. So both of these principles, the things they stand for, are recognizable in one's personality, regardless of their gender identification. And there's a great range of expression for these complementary principles. So they don't have to conform to societal norms of the past or present. Astrologers, you know, you'll read astrological descriptions, and they'll usually have Venus associated with the woman and Mars associated with the man. But these are just these gender roles that society has considered the norm for many years, and they don't have to be that way. Just think of them as representing desire. So Venus, the beloved. Venus represents what we love and cherish. Okay, she's the part of us that yearns to belong and to be told they're special. The sign Venus is in will point to how we love, what kinds of people we want around us, and what we want in relationships. Is it, for instance, a sensual experience and stability, like Venus and Taurus, or a friendly intellectual bond, like Venus and Aquarius? Or is it an energetic activity partner to go do something with, like Venus and Aries we might like? Venus represents what is of value and how we view things like our own worth. The sign it's in shows the kinds of things we value and what we want to feel valued for. Venus relates to aesthetics, beauty, and social graces. The sign tells us about our personal style and preferred kinds of cultural activities. Venus is about pleasure most of all. The sign will indicate the kinds of social and sensual or sensory experiences and the kinds of material objects that are likely to bring pleasure. What is of pleasure will have worth to Venus and value. And notice I'm careful to say value and worth rather than values, because values can be found, as Mira has reminded me over and over again, in many places in the chart. But Venus is what is of value, what is worth something to me. An example, Marlene Dietrich. She was a German-American actress who was known, as the quote says, for a unique and androgynous sex appeal, which is very much that Aquarian kind of energy. So she was born in 1901 in Germany. She has a Capricorn sun and a Leo moon, just like David Bowie, and she was a superstar like Bowie. And her Venus, remember, in this example, was in Aquarius. So that's what we're looking at. So for a Venus in Aquarius in general, being different is worth everything. She feels special when people recognize the unique things that she knows, because Aquarius is an air sign, so it's intellectual and it's about being unique. So Venus in Aquarius feels special when people recognize the unique things that she knows. And she enjoys a kind of intellectual or social intimacy that could seem cool and distant to a sensual type like a Taurus Venus. Her relationship style is friendly and group-oriented because those are Aquarian characteristics. Perhaps she has humanitarian interests. That's also something Aquarius is known for. Her tastes are quirky, perhaps androgynous or modern. Here's a couple quotes to illustrate that. Over 3 years, Dietrich entertained 500,000 war prisoners and Allied troops across Europe and Africa. Not only did she perform for the troops, but she waited in food lines with them, as well as slept with them in the ruins near the front lines. So this is someone who had a great love for humanity and went out there and demonstrated that in the relationships she created with the military. Also, starring in many roles through the 1930s and 40s, the femme fatale was known again for her unique and at times androgynous sex appeal. Okay, a couple other little examples I have on the sidebar there. So you probably can't see it because it's blocked by the inset. So Venus in Leo, look for a full head of hair, a real mane with Venus in Leo, known for very striking physical beauty, especially in the hair. Because that's a Leo trait, and natural health-oriented personal care products with Venus in Virgo, or someone who is willing to do a lot of service work in their relationships. Mars, the warrior. Mars symbolizes our drive, our energy, our physicality, and athleticism. It also symbolizes anger, fighting, aggression, as well as cutting and inflammation, courage or cowardice, bravery, directness. The key to working your Mars is getting clear about what you want and then learning how to go after it directly and assertively. While considering others, that's important, it will help. But it's hard for Mars because Mars and Venus are both about what do I want? They are inherently selfish, not necessarily in a bad way, just as that part of your personality which wants to look out for itself, to obtain what it likes, what it wants. Mars separates, individuates, forges his own identity. Mars is a planet linked to sexual desire, and it symbolizes our drive in general. The sign Mars is in suggests how one would assert themselves and what kinds of and how much physical and sexual activity they might need. Also might indicate the kinds of things they would fight about or get worked up over. Right? And that could be very different. When Mars in Aquarius, you could really stand up for a principle and fight for it. But Mars in Cancer, you might be very personal and get up and fight for your family or your country, your tribe. Okay, it's very much more personal energy. In Aquarian, Mars would be much more detached. So this is the way society should be, and I'm going to stand on this principle and go out and protest and fight for it. Okay, those are two different expressions of the same planet, the same part of our personality, the same function in our lives. Example, the Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, the 14th Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet and a globally known figure. Cancer Sun, Virgo Moon, Libran Mars, born in 1935 in Tibet. Now, Mars is opposite where it likes to be when it's in Libra. It likes to be in Aries, which is a very good, straightforward, direct, active sign. But here it is in the opposite sign, Libra. And so this is a good example to show that just because you are born with a planet in a sign that's difficult for it to express itself in doesn't mean that you can't succeed. In fact, you can succeed very well. If you look down to the bottom of the slide here, look at the world leaders that have had Mars in Libra. Winston Churchill, Abe Lincoln, Pope Francis, Pope John Paul II, Bill Clinton, Margaret Thatcher, all world leaders. They all had Mars in Libra. So how does Mars assert itself in a sign that is about balance and harmony in relationship? Well, Mars in Libra best asserts himself diplomatically and finds physical outlets in balancing exercises like Tai Chi or yoga, or those which have an aesthetically pleasing component to them, like dance. They're both physical and beautiful. It's both assertion and diplomacy. Okay, so you're combining what Mars does with the energy of Libra. There might be a drive to create relationships with Mars and Libra, but they're going to stand out as an individual because Mars always individuates within that relationship. So you want it in a relationship, but you're going to be a strong individual in that relationship. Okay, Mars and Libra. Okay, now we come to Jupiter and Saturn, the social planets. We have jolly Jupiter and stern Saturn. Now look at the symbols. And the symbols for Venus and Mars, those are the ones we commonly see associated with female and male. But again, we all have a Venus and a Mars in our chart, regardless of how we identify. And so they are simply a part of ourselves that have to do with our own personal desires. Jupiter has a symbol like a letter 4. I think of it like an easy chair, a big comfy easy chair, whereas Saturn has a symbol like an H with a bar across the top. So it's kind of like this hard, uncomfortable, straight back chair that doesn't even let you rest your head on the back of the seat back. So that's kind of the nature of Jupiter and Saturn as well. So that's how I remember them. Jupiter is the principle of expansion, and Saturn of contraction. So like Venus and Mars, Jupiter and Saturn balance each other out. They tend to work in the same arena, doing things in opposite ways. Jupiter and Saturn steer our growth as individuals, but they operate in a larger sphere too. Remember, these are the social planets. They take a year, 2.5 years to move through a sign. So a whole group, a class, a cohort of people are born with these planets in the same sign. They are regulators of economic cycles and other social developments. Jupiter and Saturn also mark the decades. They meet up every 20 years. And at the halfway point, at the decadal mark, they are opposite each other. So together, opposite, together, opposite, together, opposite every 10 years. Let's run down a list of characteristics. There we go. Jupiter lightens, allows for, and I'm going to switch from Jupiter to Saturn and back and forth. So Jupiter lightens, allows for, and eases. It is tolerant, it's generous, it creates space, while Saturn tightens, restricts, sets boundaries, and limits. Saturn builds structures. So Saturn is very sound, Jupiter is very easygoing, large, creates a lot of space for things. Jupiter's the professor, the guru, Santa, the all-you-can-eat buffet. Saturn is the teacher, the rule maker, the disciplinarian. He's the authority, and he's taciturn by nature. Doesn't say much, says things very seriously, very few words. Jupiter says, sure, yes, by all means. Saturn says, no, not until you do the work. Jupiter represents material wealth and success, luck, and good fortune. The ancients called it great benefic. Now, Saturn can represent certainly a lack, a restriction, and hardship. They called it the great malefic. But Saturn also symbolizes solid achievements through planning, hard work, and that thing you just hate when you're younger is delayed gratification. I want it now. And Jupiter says, okay, here, you can have it. There's plenty to go around. Saturn's like, no, wait, you got to plan it out. You got to work through it step by step, and then wait, and then you'll get it. Jupiter symbolizes our personal philosophy, the beliefs that bring meaning to our life. It lifts our spirits. You have to have Jupiter operating in your chart to have that kind of uplifting, expansive energy where you can just loosen your belt and take a big breath in and just feel big, large, and full of lightness and air. You could also be a big windbag that way, right? So Jupiter gets too full of itself. Saturn is our personal authority and work ethic. Okay, so Saturn creates or manifests things in the world that last. It's a very materially oriented planet. Jupiter's problems have to do with unrestrained growth. Too much, too easy, too inflated. Saturn suffers from a sense of inadequacy, works too hard, keeps things too small, too tight, too restricted, plays it safe, keeps suffering from these unexamined fears that keep a person from taking a risk. So these are the problems that Jupiter and Saturn run into, and you can see they're very different. So when you grow with Jupiter and Saturn, Jupiter learns how to grow in non-material ways and learns how to pace material expansion. So rather than more and more and more, right? This is a problem we have in our society. We always want more, and there's a cost to that. So pacing material expansion is part of growing with Jupiter. Saturn learns to distinguish between work and work in all capitals. It becomes good at structuring things and accepting genuine limits. And some of this comes naturally with age. I'm getting to a point, I still struggle with some things, but I'm getting to a point where I'm beginning to run into some physical limits. I can't just do whatever I want as much as I want. And I actually feel comfortable with that. It's good to recognize limits and go, no, I'm going to set a boundary there. I'm going to stop rather than push past this limit, because bodies have limits. And as we age, those limits get a little more obvious to us. Okay. And so Saturn, we kind of grow into Saturn as we get older. Okay. But when we're younger, we really hate that sense of restriction, right? We don't want to be told that we have to limit things or that there's something we can't do. We don't want to go to bed early when we're younger. I'm probably going to have that problem for my entire life. But like I said, in other ways, definitely becoming more comfortable with Saturn. And for things that we don't want to limit, Saturn sets a limit for us, right? The limits, physical things that have limits. So we have to work a bit to become comfortable with these. Saturn makes us more worldly by showing us the bigger picture and exploring broader concepts, other cultures, other belief systems. It recognizes fortune, develops optimism, and a sense of faith in life. Jupiter encourages generosity and tolerance in both material and emotional arenas. With time and effort, Saturn becomes mature, quietly confident, and authoritative. The example I have for Jupiter and Saturn, now this time we're going to look at two different planets in the same sign, Jupiter and Saturn in Gemini. Two examples, Michael Moore and Rachel Maddow. Michael Moore is an Oscar-winning left-wing documentary filmmaker, and Rachel Maddow is an Emmy Award-winning news anchor on the liberal news channel MSNBC. So Michael Moore is a Taurus sun with a Capricorn moon. That's a lot of Earth energy, right? He was born in 1954 in Michigan. He makes documentaries. They're full of information, right? In facts, investigative journalism. This is all Gemini stuff. Well, but they tackle larger concepts like social inequalities and the excesses of capitalism. Plus, he shares his opinions on the big screen. So bigness is Jupiter, right? So rather than a little television documentary or a piece that airs on the evening news, he goes with the big movie screens. Okay, so that's Jupiter expressing itself through the very fact-based, everyday kind of energy of Gemini. Rachel Maddow is an Aries sun with a Pisces moon and Saturn in Gemini. She was born in 1973 in California. Now, here's a story from her life that reflects many Saturn and Gemini themes, like caution, boundaries, age restriction, and work for Saturn, newspapers, communication, and local travel for Gemini. So when Rachel came out, she was a student, but she wanted to tell her parents in person before the student newspaper ran a story about her, which included her coming out in that story. So the newspaper didn't wait. It didn't adhere to the restrictions applied to her. And a newspaper is a very Gemini thing. So her parents found out by reading the article in the school newspaper, and they were really upset by that. That created a problem with their relationship with their daughter. So they had to work through that. That's Saturn, right? They had to work through it to reestablish a good relationship, which they did. Also, if you think about Rachel Maddow, how she works as a news anchor, she delivers information with a strong authoritative kind of presence, right? So Saturn in Gemini is going to communicate with authority. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, these are the transpersonal planets. So remember again how I said Saturn was the last planet known for all of human history up until 1781 when Uranus was discovered. So think of Saturn as representing the physical limits of our senses. It's what we can see with our eyeballs and our brains for those of us who are sighted. Saturn defines the edge of the human or material world. And once we move beyond that, we move into bigger energies, energies that are beyond the scope of any individual. So even though all the planets in our astrological system are named after gods and goddesses, I think of the things after Saturn as being kind of the gods and goddesses of the astrological solar system, and everything from the sun to Saturn is representing humanly recognizable kinds of energies, humanity, if you will. These are humans, and the things out beyond Saturn are gods and goddesses. Okay, it's just one way that I kind of conceptualize of it in my mind that may work for you as well. If it doesn't, just let it go. The first of these energies, Uranus, the change agent. Here's its symbol. It kind of looks like a person with a big antenna, like Mercury, but with a big antenna on their head, pulling in all these electronic signals from the universe. That's a very Uranian kind of image. So let's talk a little bit about the mythology and also the astronomy of Uranus. So astronomy, or in mythology, Uranus was the elemental sky god, and these elemental gods were predecessors of the Olympians and the Titans, who were the Olympians' parents. The planet Uranus was discovered in 1781 by William Herschel with help from his sister Caroline, who went on to discover the first comet and many other comets. Uranus was the first planet discovered since ancient times, and so it shattered a long-held idea about the limits of our solar system. So, astrologically, Uranus represents rebellion. Something wants to smash the old structures and patterns, which is what Saturn stands for. It brings in new ways of seeing and doing things. Its actions are almost always unexpected or surprising, and they can come as a shock or a disruption and create radical change, but that change doesn't always last. Remember, Saturn is the planet that makes things last. So if Uranus and Saturn don't work together, you might not create lasting change. And they can work together, even though they are really opposites. Uranus can be an eccentric personality or a genius, one who does things their own way, the iconoclast. Uranus is impersonal energy. Okay, it can be intolerant of anything that doesn't conform to its ideals. The kind of person that ignores rules that quote unquote don't apply. Uranus is strongly associated with science, with electricity and electronics, lightning, and that kind of instant intuitive knowledge, like the bolt out of the blue idea that just suddenly appears in your mind. It can also indicate an interest in astrology. It is definitely associated with astrology. So examples, musician Björk from Iceland and Gary Busey, an American actor. These are both viewed as eccentric people, and they present themselves with great eccentricity. So they were both born with Uranus at the top of their chart, a point called the midheaven, which represents our career, our public self, and our reputation. And so it's up there at the highest point that any planet, a sun or moon, will get to as the Earth turns and it moves through the sky each night. And so they were born when it was up there at the top of the chart, so that they're presenting themselves in this most visible light. Uranus is coming through in that most visible part of their selves. And it clearly does. You know, this is how Björk presents herself publicly. This is how Gary Busey looks publicly. You can see that kind of wildness and the eccentricity in their gaze or in their dress. Okay. Neptune. Neptune is the sensitive artist, the creator of illusion. So Neptune symbolizes illusion, escapism, and fantasy. Now, more positively, Neptune is associated with dreams, art, music, photography. It's poetic, it's inspirational, and it creates a lot of sensitivity within your chart. So Neptune softens what it touches in the chart. It brings feelings of compassion and selflessness to your life. So boundaries can never be rigid where Neptune is in your chart. So again, Neptune is opposite Saturn, but in a different way from Uranus. It doesn't smash things, it dissolves them. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or right now, Neptune blurs the boundaries between the material world and the world of intangibles, dreams, and ideals, enticing humans with a suggestion of the divine within their reach. It's sexy, it's alluring. Think of a superhero or a superstar, a supermodel, or a sex symbol. These are all the real life people who are made into something larger than life and very attractive by using makeup, lighting, photography, marketing, image making, PR, all things to make them something more than what they actually are if you meet them in person and understand their everyday lives. So you can see why Neptune is often associated with drugs and addiction, along with other escapist behaviors, living in a fantasy world, right? It can be seen in confusing health issues, things that we can't get clarity around, and also in weaknesses. So here we go. Unlike the shocks of Uranus, Neptune's action is dissolving over time of everything solid, which again is Saturn. So the process is basically this. First, you fall for something, It's an illusion. So you become disillusioned when the reality doesn't live up to the ideal. And then you nurse your wounds for a while, regroup, and come back with greater clarity and wisdom. So disillusionment is disappointing and even painful. And we often think of it as the end, like you become disillusioned with something, that's it, it's over. But the key to working with Neptune is not getting stuck in disillusionment, but seeing it as part of the process. So you're being disillusioned. The illusions are being taken away so that you can better accept and see what is real. So disillusionment can become an ally in life once you learn to accept it and take care of yourself in the process, because it is painful and it can be embarrassing or even shame producing when something doesn't live up to an ideal and you look like a fool because you fell for it. But that's part of the process. So don't get stuck on disillusionment, but see it as merely that middle step, that important step that brings you closer to reality and being more empowered. And empowerment is what Pluto is all about. So Pluto is the transformer. Here's the symbol, the bident, the two-pronged sphere. Neptune had the trident. I had it in here. Yes, the trident, the three-pronged spear of Neptune. So Pluto has a bident, a two-pronged spear with an orb resting between the two prongs of the spear. That's one of its symbols. So Pluto represents power, intensity, and depth. It buries things and it holds them in, and then it brings them up to the surface like a volcano. Pluto is about long-term and profound changes that occur slowly and deeply. Remember how far out there in the solar system Pluto is. It moves it takes a long, long time to move around the sun. So it takes 10, 12 years to move through a sign. Okay, so it's a very slow process that's associated with Pluto. It's like a death and rebirth, as opposed to a sudden shock or a washing away that you get with Uranus and Neptune. Pluto can be seen as a need to ensure one's survival that often operates below the level of awareness. This contributes to a kind of obsessive nature, a drive to get to the core of things, to drill down right to the core of it, the center of it, and then to gain power and control over things. Okay, these are all things that are associated with Pluto, and you can see how you become too full of yourself when you get a little taste of this energy. It can be dangerous, right? Or at least create a problem. Both of these symbols are commonly associated with Pluto. So I talked about the bident with the orb, and the other one is a P and an L. It's a monogram, which stands for Percival Lowell. And Percival Lowell founded the Lowell Observatory in Arizona in 1916, where Pluto was discovered by Clyde Tombaugh in 1930. So here's an example. Pluto out there in the world can show up in things like nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, underground energy resources, okay, energy and underground, like coal, oil, uranium. It can be associated with vast wealth. Think of the term plutarchs, referring to this global elite holding all this wealth and power, and global corporations. Pluto also represents psychological power. So it's a symbol for personal empowerment and transformational growth, which makes it very popular among psychologically oriented astrologers, and evolutionary astrologers is one of those. Pluto often brings a feeling of dread, different from Saturn's security fears. It's an impersonal kind of demand to change, and it brings this very heavy, serious feeling when Pluto comes over something in your chart. And it's going to be there for a few years, going back and forth over it before it moves on, and it will leave you changed. And the key with Pluto is allowing that process to happen, allowing for this deep change, this kind of death and rebirth to happen. Because when you come out the other side, you have a profound sense of empowerment and a knowledge of life, a depth to your personality that you did not have before Pluto did its work. So this is a challenge when Pluto hits something in your chart, making space for the process of change and getting used to that heavy, serious feeling that is going to be around for a while. So Pluto in Leo, as an example, might love attention-grabbing dramatic things like exposés and stories about how a person overcame severe trauma and claimed one's power. Right? This is Leo getting out there in a very bold way that focuses on the individual. Pluto and Leo might want to hold on to the stage like it's life and death, right? Being in the limelight is just absolute matter of life and death to some people with Pluto and Leo. Here's my example for both Neptune and Pluto. Greta Thunberg, this is the teen who started climate strike activism. You know, one day she's sitting by herself in front of the Swedish parliament or the Norwegian parliament building, and like a month later or 2 months later, there are tens of thousands of students walking out of school and striking to draw attention to the fact that the climate is changing and causing all these really intense problems in the world. So that was a transformation, right? Greta Thunberg's a Capricorn sun with a Capricorn moon and Saturn in Gemini. So she has that work ethic and authoritative voice. She was born with Pluto in Sagittarius. Remember the example of Sarah Silverman, who had Mercury in Sagittarius, so the need to put things out there without filters. And Neptune in Aquarius, which again is a kind of a humanitarian sign associated with caring about humanity as a whole. So Greta expressed being extremely sensitive to environmental and social issues. She couldn't even watch movies about environmental problems. She would become so upset, she ended up staying home from school and then began learning about them because she said she just had to do this, right? Otherwise, she wasn't going to be able to function in the world. So she decided to empower herself through education and through talking to her family first and then going out and talking to others. So that sensitivity represents Neptune in Aquarius, because Aquarius is an air sign attuned to society and groups. So that pressure again led her to transform herself. She described herself as a quiet, depressed kid who sat in the back of a classroom and didn't say anything. So there's Pluto, Sagittarius. You're either going to bring it out with no filters, or you're going to hold everything in and bury it deeply. And then there's that process of going from one to the other, that process of profound transformation and empowerment that's associated with Pluto. She is now a global voice for climate action, powerfully blunt rebukes, right? Powerful Pluto, blunt rebukes, Sagittarius, no filters, shaming corporate CEOs and world leaders, the power elite, right? Pluto things, for not acting on climate change. So power, transformation, silence, all things having to do with Pluto. Sagittarius, known to be outspoken. She says she was inspired by Parkland High students. No BS response to the shooting that took place at their high school. And that's it, our astrological solar system, at least as much as I'm going to give you to start with. Once you get the feel for the planets and signs, you can try adding some sprinkles. That was Saturn speaking, right? Do your work first, then you can have dessert. I'd like to leave you with these instructions for finding your planetary positions without having to make your chart. This book of tables is called an ephemeris because it lists data relating to passing or ephemeral phenomena, like the movement of planets. It shows you not just where things were when you were born, but where they were before and where they were going after. So you get some context. And you can purchase an ephemeris from thrift books or Amazon, but in the meantime, you can just go to Astrogeast and download or print as many pages as you want. First, click All About Astrology, then 9,000 Year Ephemeris. You select your century that you want, and then the year, and then click to download the PDF or view it. Now the positions are for Greenwich, midnight Greenwich Mean Time, which is the time in London where the Greenwich meridian is 0 degrees of longitude. So you have to convert your birth time in whatever time zone you were in, and if you were in daylight time, you have to convert that to Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT. It's also called Universal Time, or UT or UTC. So you can go to earthsky.org to do that. There's the website there. You can take a screenshot and copy that, or just Google it. Couple things. One thing here, you'll notice there's an R at the top of some of the columns in the degrees. So it's like, for instance, Mars is 12 degrees, and that's a symbol for Leo, and 0 minutes. Saturn is 12 degrees, and then it has an R. And if you look below the R, you'll see it's a sign of Aquarius. 12 degrees Aquarius, 23 minutes. That's the location of Saturn in the zodiac. And the R means it's moving backwards. And when it turns direct, and that they'll show up at the top of every column if it's in this retrograde motion, which we'll talk about in another lecture. And then when it turns direct, you'll see a D there at that day that it turns direct. So don't have to worry about that now. But again, you'll see that it's moving backwards from 1223 to 1219 in the case of Saturn, whereas Mars is moving forward from 12:0 to 12:38. Okay, so get used to looking at the different planets. You can familiarize yourself with the symbols here, and also look at their motions. Look at your day of birth and see where they were, and see what the planets were doing. Which ones were moving forward, which ones were moving backwards. Where did they come from? Where are they going? How are they changing their relationship to each other? Do some end up at the same degree of opposite signs? Where does the moon go to? When's the new moon, before and after your birth? When's the full moon? You can begin to explore the context of your birth and not just see it as one moment. So that's what ephemeri are good for. And again, it's also a way to familiarize yourself with your planets without having to make a chart. Okay. So once again, my name is Paul Kelley, and you can contact me at paulkelleyastrologer@gmail.com. I do lectures, readings, and classes. So if you're interested, or you just have a comment you want to share, feedback from about this lecture, then feel free to drop me a line or leave it in the comments on the YouTube page. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again at the next lecture. Bye-bye.